it interviews the first speaker, Dominic de Omera. He is professor at Freiburg University in Switzerland, and his presentation is about Greek philosophical ethics in Arabic translation. And I think this would be a kind of intellectual dialogue or dialogue of civilization between Greek civilization and Islamic civilization. I'm looking forward to your presentation, Thomas.
Starting well. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm very sorry to have to speak in English. You must know that I'm not English, I'm Irish. And the English killed our language. So I have a difficult relationship with the English language. So please forgive me, but I do it unwillingly. I'd much prefer to speak your language, but I'm incompetent. At first, I would like to thank my Iranian hosts for the opportunity to be part of this seminar. It is a great privilege and honor to be here. I also have apologies, many apologies to make. I'm afraid that I will have not much to say in this paper about interreligious dialogue, at least not directly. My paper will concern more intercultural dialogue, but here also I have apologies to make. I'm afraid that I will not be discussing modern times, the situation today, but will be referring to philosophers belonging to a distant past, to Greco-Roman antiquity from Plato to the end of the Roman Empire, and to the first centuries of philosophy in the Islamic world. However, the people I will be mentioning are not philosophers, such as might be called specialists in Anglo-American academic institutions. Rather, the philosophers I will be introducing were deeply concerned with reflecting on human nature, on human society, on human happiness, and the way to achieve perfection, on man's relation to God. Their reflection on these themes included thinking about pagan religions in their conceptions of the ways which lead to human happiness, as did the early Islamic philosophers, who of course made Islamic religion part of their own philosophical worldview. Indeed, we can speak of an interreligious dialogue in the sense that these philosophers situated religions in a larger area, that of philosophical reflection on the great questions of human existence. This area can certainly be described as intercultural, since I will be describing the transition from a high philosophical culture in the Greco-Roman world to a high Islamic culture. This transition is not only fascinating for the historian in showing the emergence of a great philosophical tradition in the Islamic world, but is also instructive if we compare it to problems of modern interreligious and intercultural divergence and convergence, maybe. Finally, I have a last apology to make before I begin. I will be referring to Islamic philosophers who wrote in Arabic. Although I once took a crash course in classical Arabic, I must rely on modern European translations of texts which, of course, are well known and much read in Iran. I have absolutely no expertise here and no pretensions, hoping on the contrary to be able to learn. On the other hand, I do have some expertise in Greek philosophy, and I believe that knowing Greek philosophy better can help to throw some new light on Islamic philosophers who could read more of Greek philosophy than we can today. In this paper, I will be speaking specifically of philosophical ethics in classical and late antique Greek authors and the reception, integration, and transformation of this ethics in three early Islamic philosophers, Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Miskawayh. There is no single unified philosophical ethics in ancient Greek authors, but rather a rich variety of different ethical concepts and theories. And in the first part of this paper, I will try to give a sketch of this variety as represented in texts which were translated into Arabic and used by early Islamic philosophers. You have a list, I hope, of these texts that I'll be talking about. I will then suggest ways in which Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Miskawayh made use of various parts of this rich variety in creating their own philosophical ethics. So first, late antiquity, antiquity and late antiquity. No complete medieval Arabic translation or translations of Plato's dialogues are known. However, summaries, paraphrases, for example by Galen, excerpts and indirect sources are available. As regards ethics, I would like to remind you of some fundamental ideas to be found in Plato's Republic. In this text, Plato divides the human soul into three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. And he defines four cardinal virtues in terms of these three parts. Wisdom is the virtue or excellence of reason, courage is the virtue of spirit, moderation is the virtue of desire. When each part of the soul functions correctly, excellently, justice in the soul is realized. A good soul is a soul which functions correctly. When reason rules desire with the support of spirit, this is a healthy soul. A sick soul is one ruled by desire or spirit. One is ruled by desire or spirit, and where reason is overruled. Plato's theory of the good soul and its virtues were transmitted into Arabic by various sources. The pseudo-Aristotelian text, De Virtutibus Vitiis, you have this on your left. The pseudo-Aristotle virtues of the soul, quoted by Miskawayh, and I'll talk about this text later. And most importantly, Galen, the Perieton de Moribus, a text surviving only in an Arabic summary, and which was very popular and influential in early Islamic philosophy. Galen adds to Plato's theory of the Aristotelian idea that habituation of the irrational parts of the soul, spirit and desire, is very important for forming moral character. He also included the Platonic idea that reason is what distinguishes us as humans, that we are motivated by love of beauty and the good, and that we should seek to become like God. Aristotle. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics was available in Arabic translation and was very influential, being often quoted, for example, by Miskawayh. Aristotle's ethics were different from Plato's in various ways. I would like to stress the following points. First, Aristotle calls the science which he aims to develop in his book, he calls the science political science, on the grounds that the good which we seek to achieve, happiness, is greater in a state, polis, than in an individual. He defines the virtues differently from Plato on the basis of a distinction between irrational aspects of the soul that can receive rational influence and reason itself. To this distinction correspond two types of virtues: moral virtues, which are dispositions of the irrational aspects of the soul acquired under the influence of reason through habituation, and intellectual virtues, which include theoretical and practical wisdom. Moral virtues are defined furthermore as dispositions representing a mean between two extremes of excess or deficiency. Thus, courage is a mean state between foolhardiness and cowardice. Happiness includes living both kinds of virtue, but also having good health, friends, external goods. Aristotle tells us this in Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. However, in Book 10, he says that the highest happiness for humans is the perfection of what is divine in us, our reason, perfected by the virtue of wisdom. through theoretical wisdom we live a life such as the gods must lead, whereas the practical life, which involves the moral virtues, is a lower form of happiness. Finally, the last part of this first part of my paper, Neoplatonism. The revival of Platonic philosophy in late antiquity, today called Neoplatonism, brought about by Plotinus in the 3rd century, and his many intellectual successors, Porphyry, Iamblichus, Proclus, and others, produced a new ethical approach transforming both Platonic and Aristotelian ethics. Porphyry, Plotinus' pupil, wrote a commentary on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which is lost, but some extracts are preserved in Arabic by Almiri, and it is cited by Miskawai. Here Porphyry repeated Aristotle's claim that human perfection in what we have of the divine lies in theoretical wisdom. The pseudo-Pythagorean golden verses, which had been translated into Arabic, were the object of a commentary which survives only in Arabic and is attributed questionably to Iamblichus. In this text we find a hierarchy of virtues which function as a ladder leading us to the divine. Intellect is what is divine in us. Souls become similar to the divine in freeing themselves from material existence and rising above it. Such ideas can also be found in another commentary on the golden verses, attributed also questionably to Proclus and surviving only in Arabic. Here the lowest level of virtue is that reached in the soul, which includes at first the 3 parts which Plato distinguished in the Republic, in which the irrational and bestial is dominated by reason, but whose perfection is a life free from passions, a higher life of theoretical wisdom. The idea of a hierarchy of virtues is more fully elaborated in a Greek text available only in Arabic translation, attributed in a manuscript in Morocco to a certain Nicholas, under the title Introduction to the Study of Ethics. 4 levels of virtues are mentioned: the political virtues, which correspond to Plato's 4 cardinal virtues, and are described as states representing the mean between extremes, the purificatory virtues, which purify us from passions, the theoretical virtues, that is, the virtues of the human intellect taken in itself, and the transcendent models of these theoretical virtues. Human happiness consists in seeking to be like the divine as far as possible. The hierarchy of virtues provides a scale of degrees leading higher towards divine life. This Neoplatonic hierarchy of levels of virtue can be found again in an extract from a Greek text quoted by Miskawai in an Arabic translation. This text is otherwise unknown, with the title The Virtues of the Soul, falsely attributed to Aristotle. In a larger version of part of this text found by Daiber in a manuscript in Mosul and falsely attributed to Plato, we read that the philosophers disagreed as to whether virtue was enough for happiness. Some, the Pythagoreans, Socrates, and Plato, thought that virtue was enough, and others, Aristotelian Stoics, thought that external goods were also required. The hierarchy of virtues as presented in Miskawai's extract limits things of the body to the lowest level of virtue, where desires are moderated so as to reach states as mean between extremes. Higher virtue brings separation of the soul from passions and desires at various degrees, and the highest level of virtue is that of soul as an intellect which knows divine things and becomes like the divine first cause, the absolute good. This is the ultimate good for happiness. I'm very sorry. I completely miscalculated. I thought I could read 1 page in 3 minutes. And so I wrote 7 pages. But I'm on page 4. So what do we do? I can do Al-Kindi. And then Al-Farabi and Iqtawi. Okay, I do that. Okay, there's a magnificent text of Al-Kindi I want to read to you. Moving now to the ways in which this rich library of Greek ethical philosophy was received, integrated, and transformed in early Islamic philosophy, I would like to begin with Al-Kindi, who played an essential role in supporting the translation of Greek texts. I would like to first to quote an admirable statement of his in this regard. I'm quoting Al-Kindi, we must not be ashamed to admire the truth or to acquire it from wherever it comes, even it should come from far-flung nations and foreign peoples. There is for the student of truth nothing more important than the truth. Nor is the truth demeaned or diminished by the one who states or conveys it. No one is demeaned by the truth, rather all are ennobled by it. The truth which Al-Kindi could find in the works of Plotinus, which were translated in his circle, was that the essence of human nature is the rational soul, which can exist separately from the body and which has its origin and home in a transcendent, immaterial, unchanging, intelligible reality. The perfection of human nature, its happiness, is knowledge of intelligible objects, in particular of the highest principle of all reality, God. Here below in the material world, the soul lives with the body as its instrument. Life here below is marked by instability, frustration, loss. Our good, our happiness, is not to be found in such a life, but in the higher life of intellectual perfection. Virtue is required in order to reach this perfection. We begin with the virtues needed in soul's life with the body. Al-Kindi refers here to the three parts of the soul of Plato's Republic and to the four cardinal virtues, which he describes in terms of an Aristotelian concept of moral virtues. These virtues are habits acquired as mean states between extremes. Moral virtues are part of an ascending scale representing degrees of control and independence of the soul in regard to passions and desires. Al-Kindi elaborates in a remarkable way the parable of passengers on a sea voyage who stop on the way to visit an island. The parable comes from Epictetus. Different passengers allow themselves to become involved to different degrees in the attractions of the island, that is, material existence. The less one allows oneself to get involved in these attractions, the better one is prepared for reaching the ultimate destination, the transcendent immaterial life of the soul as intellect. Purified of all desires and passions, the human soul reaches the highest virtue, assimilation to God by knowledge of God as illuminated by God. However, Al-Kindi is also careful to stress that God transcends all similarity and transcends intellect. Here, Plotinus' radical claim that the absolute good, the ultimate first principle, the One, is beyond all thinking and determinate being, was clearly an important truth to be adopted. In conclusion, I think we can say that Al-Kindi saw in Greek texts views about man's nature and destiny which he found useful in an Islamic context and which he could build into a remarkably coherent philosophical system. We might say that his preference is for a Platonic, or rather Neoplatonic view of humanity and human happiness. Human happiness is to be found in the perfection of the rational soul through knowledge, in particular knowledge to the extent possible of God as illuminated by God. A scale of virtues leads to this happiness, beginning with the virtues needed in soul's life in the body, in material existence. These virtues are described as the virtues of Plato's Republic and the moral virtues of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. They are only the first level of a Neoplatonic scale of virtues which corresponds to increasing degrees in the control of desires and passions, leading to purification from these desires and passions, and assimilation to God to the extent possible. Okay, so that another one. One more. I'm on page 5. This. This is silly. Okay, Al-Farabi. If we compare him with Al-Kindi, Al-Kindi's approach is strongly marked by Platonism, Neoplatonism, but of course Al-Farabi, the major source is Aristotle. Al-Farabi is deeply influenced by, for example, by Aristotle's theory of scientific knowledge, physics, metaphysics, psychology, and ethics. In Al-Farabi's perfect state, we find an Aristotelian theory of the soul, a biological hierarchy of the faculties of the soul, culminating in reason, theoretical and practical. There is, however, a problem concerning the immortality of the human soul in Al-Farabi, but I'll leave that up in a moment. The Aristotelian influence can be felt not only in psychology but also in ethics. Al-Farabi, following Aristotle, distinguishes between two kinds of virtues, moral virtue and intellectual virtue. Moral virtues are acquired through habituation and are mean states between extremes. Intellectual virtues include practical wisdom and theoretical wisdom. Aristotle's description of the science of the human good, of happiness, and of the virtues as political science was crucial for Al-Farabi. He took seriously Aristotle's view of political structures as a context in which humans can be educated and attain happiness. However, no Arabic translation of Aristotle's Politics was available. Instead, Al-Farabi had to consult summaries of Plato's Republic and Laws, and he also seems to have met indirectly ideas coming from Plato's Statesman. Making use of these materials, Al-Farabi developed an original political philosophy and an impressive political project for an ideal state presented in the perfect state. The perfect state is placed in the context of a metaphysical hierarchy of reality and includes a social hierarchy in which lower ranks are directed by higher ranks in a system designed to transmit knowledge and to provide moral education throughout the state. The social hierarchy corresponds to a hierarchy of virtues, moral virtues being subordinated to leading up to higher virtues, the highest level being represented by the ideal ruler or rulers, who is also a prophet, an imam, who disposes of knowledge of the metaphysical structure of reality and of its first principles, who communicates this knowledge through religion and leads the lower ranks thereby to happiness. Al-Farabi's political philosophy went far beyond anything that he could find in the Greek sources. The systematic spirit, inspired by the ideal of scientific thinking which he found in Aristotle, led him to integrate Aristotelian psychology and ethics with a Neoplatonic concept of a scale of virtues and of an ideal ruler, the philosopher king, in a project which also formulated the political function of religion as the expression of metaphysical truths and as the instrument of moral education. This is a very impressive achievement. So there it is. Just